Europe imposes an oil embargo on Iran. President Barack Obama says the US will take no options off the table to prevent Iran from gaining a nuclear weapon. Is it possible that the West will start another war in the Middle East? Hello and welcome to The World This Week with me, Phil Rees. The European Union agreed on a complete embargo on Iranian oil earlier this week, sharply escalating the sanctions regime against Tehran. The EU also froze the Iranian central bank assets in Europe and banned gold transactions and other precious metals and gems. The move has raised the stakes dramatically in the standoff between Iran and the West over its nuclear program. Where is all this leading? Well, that'll be our first discussion tonight. In part two, a jihadist from London is killed in a US drone attack in Somalia. Are many foreign fighters, including young men from Britain, travelling to Somalia? Well, after the invasion by Kenyan forces, when is there a difference between, well, one sort of foreign fighter and another? That's in 25 minutes. But first, the West, or indeed possibly Israel, is already waging a covert war in an attempt to derail Iran's nuclear program. Unknown assailants have murdered 5 Iranian nuclear scientists over the past 2 years. It's also believed that Israel, and perhaps the US, was behind the cyber attack using the Stuxnet virus, which disabled the computer system at Iran's Bushehr nuclear plant in 2010. Well, Iran has warned that the oil embargo will have serious consequences. That could mean blocking the Strait of Hormuz, through which 20% of the world's oil shipments flow. But any military action by the West or Israel is unlikely to be sanctioned by the UN Security Council. China today said that the EU's sanctions on Iran were not constructive. The Russian foreign minister earlier said that the move was pouring fuel on a fire, which is already smouldering, that would have, quote, disastrous consequences. In other developments, if you happen to look this week at Sky News Channel 515, well, it is no more. That was Press TV, the English language news station run under the auspices of Iran's supreme leader. It was no longer allowed to broadcast in the UK. Supporters of this channel feel that Ofcom's decision is part of a broader package of measures, all of which set the stage for a conflict. Well, before we discuss these matters, here's Horia El-Haddad.
Tensions between Europe and Iran have been rising over recent months. The latest point of conflict is the European Union's decision to ban imports of Iranian oil. The oil ban, which was approved at a meeting in Brussels earlier this week, along with sanctions against Iran's central bank and other measures, came as Western powers stepped up pressure on Tehran to return to negotiations, amid concerns that it's moving closer to building nuclear weapons. Iran's oil ministry issued a statement saying the sanctions didn't come as a shock, and that Tehran has already come up with measures to deal with any challenges. The EU action was welcomed in Washington, where US President Barack Obama said officials would impose more sanctions to address what he called the serious threat presented by Iran's nuclear program. Under Monday's embargo decision, all new contracts for crude oil and petroleum products between Iran and any of the EU's 27 member states will be forbidden. Existing contracts have to be suspended by the end of June. The EU wants countries which are heavily dependent on Iranian oil, namely Greece, Italy and Spain, some of the most ailing members of the Eurozone, to find new sources of supply, and secondly, to see what steps Iran is taking to come back to the negotiating table. Western countries believe Iran's uranium enrichment program is part of an effort to build a nuclear bomb. But Iran says the program is to generate electricity only. The effort to take Iran's 2.6 million barrels of oil per day off international markets has kept global prices high, pushed down Iran's currency, and is causing a surge in the cost of basic goods for Iranians.
Thank you, Horia, for that report. We're very pleased to be joined today by Mark Fitzpatrick, the Senior Fellow for Non-Proliferation at the International Institute for Strategic Studies and a long-time former American diplomat. Thank you for coming. We also have Shirin, Shafaie, a researcher at the School of Oriental and African Studies in London. And on the phone, we are very pleased again to have the former British ambassador to Tehran, Sir Richard Dalton. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. Mark Fitzpatrick, if I can turn to you. Obama leaving all options on the table. That has a menacing echo of George Bush in 2002, doesn't it?
It sure does, but I think one has to look at the political context in which he's saying it. Iran is the major foreign policy issue which Republicans are attacking him heavily. So he has to say something like this, but I don't think anybody in Washington believes that he's preparing for war. He's been trying to engage Iran in negotiations. Let's hope that that proceeds. Of course, options are not taken off the table. Maybe he shouldn't have to stress it, but it's the political environment.
So you're saying that he's banging the drums of war purely for internal American politics?
Well, I don't think I would say he's banging the drums of war. He's saying no options are taken off the table. But his main message is one of, let's try to find a diplomatic solution to this very problematic issue.
I mean, Shirin, Shafaie, I mean, would you say that the atmosphere in the West is a bellicose one?
Well, of course it is. I mean, just going back to your statement that no option is off the table, let's not forget that that includes an unprovoked nuclear attack against Iran. Obama stated in his nuclear posture review in 2010 that it's going
But
to...
that's hardly likely, is it?
Well, but he stated that, I mean, and there was a statement from Iran to the Security Council and United Nations condemning these statements. I mean, that's a big deal to attack, to threaten a country with nuclear weapons, a country which doesn't have, it's not nuclear armed. And that includes all the other options, assassinations of Iranian scientists, economic sanctions against Iran, all kinds of threats. So it's quite threatening and it's quite confrontational.
I mean, so Richard Dalton, I mean, do you believe that the sort of the way that the media is reporting this, as we've heard from Shirin there about the killing of the nuclear scientists, the murdering of these people by probably Israel, I mean, is this very helpful to the West's relations to Iran?
Well, there are several questions here about the assassinations. These are illegal killings, they are terrorism, whoever it is who has perpetrated them. If it's done by a state, then it's state terrorism, and it's quite right that Britain and the United States, among those countries who've condemned them, have used very strong language to say that that is not the right thing to do. The other question you asked about how the media is carrying all this, I think that the media is doing a pretty good job in conveying this many-sided difficulty which the international community faces. First of all, getting Iran to acknowledge that it has international obligations in the light of UN Security Council resolutions and decisions of the International Atomic Energy Agency, and it has not lived up to those obligations. There is fortunately a slight change of tone in Iran. They have said recently that they wish to be more transparent. This was in advance of the arrival of a delegation from Vienna, from the International Atomic Energy Agency, and there's been reports that Iran may, for the first time, agree to discuss in detail the allegations that in the past and possibly in the present it has and may still be conducting research and development into the military applications of certain technologies associated with its nuclear development program.
Well, we're coming to the IAEA report.
It's a very positive move forward.
Okay, so Richard, fine. But I mean, Iran, for example, has asked for a comprehensive non-proliferation discussion in the Middle East that would be all-inclusive. Of course, that means bringing in Israel, which has about 200 nuclear warheads and is not a signatory of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. That's a fair point, isn't it?
Yes, it is a fair point.
Well, why doesn't the West do anything about that or insist that Israel takes part?
Perfectly prepared to discuss that as part of the full range of issues which need to be discussed. In the position of the governments doing the negotiating with Iran is that anything can be on the table so long as the points which have been raised in those UN Security Council decisions and International Atomic Energy Agency decisions are also on the table. In other words, they do envisage a comprehensive negotiation, including points relating to regional security.
Okay. So, well, let's just talk about that. recent International Atomic Energy report, which, by the way, viewers may know, came out in November, and it certainly ratcheted up the tensions. Now, Mark Fitzpatrick, I mean, obviously you're an expert on this. You dealt with Korea, and you know, and obviously we don't want to get bogged down in detail. But basically that report said Iran does not have a bomb, and that it may be looking at some time in the future doing some research potentially. But isn't the key fact that Iran didn't have a bomb, and any of this work anyway happened before 2003?
Okay, they obviously don't have a bomb, and I think that's very important. And the whole objective of the exercise is to dissuade them from having a bomb. Now, they don't have a bomb, but they...
It's hypothetical, then.
No. They pursued technologies that get them very close to being able to have a bomb. Most of the pursuit of those weapons-related technologies appeared to have stopped in the end of 2003. But 4 areas of that work appeared to continue, according to the IAEA report, and that's one of the worrisome parts. So, Iran should answer questions about its past work, and it should stop whatever it's doing on the current expansion of these technologies.
I mean, every year we seem to hear in the media about Iran, being a year from making a bomb, and the years tick by, and yet the substance of this report is that it's old, and obviously the United States in its intelligence estimates said, both in terms of 2007 report by the CIA, the National Intelligence Estimate, which includes, of course, the CIA and I believe more than a dozen other intelligence organizations, concluded with high confidence that Tehran had halted its nuclear weapons program. And even this year, the same organization said that Iran may be keeping the door open to develop nuclear weapons in the future, all right, if it should choose to do so. We do not know, however, if Iran will eventually decide to build nuclear weapons. Well, I mean, isn't it just normal for any country to have that potential, particularly when it's surrounded by bellicose neighbors who threaten it repeatedly? I mean, is that mad behavior? I would have thought that's quite sensible.
Well, I think Iran is the only country today that is violating IAEA rules about reporting new nuclear facilities, that has pursued all of the aspects of nuclear weapons technology without finally crossing that final line, and is not cooperating with IAEA investigations to this. Now, one might say that's rational, but that's not what Iran signed up to do when they signed the NPT and agreed to forego nuclear weapons.
I mean, it's a fair point, isn't it? They have been, they have denied access, haven't they, Shirin?
No, they have not. I mean, IAEA has issued 35 reports since 2003, and all of them, without an exception, say that they verify the non-diversion of all declared nuclear materials in Iran. And that is what the IAEA is supposed to do. It has to verify the non-diversion of nuclear material. But going back, since this is actually Islam Channel, in Iran, there is the highest degree of religious importance that bans the stockpiling, production, and anything related to all weapons of mass destruction, including nuclear weapons. And an NPT, Non-Proliferation Treaty, you can actually give 2 months notice and come out of it. But you cannot come out of this, all these signals that Iran is sending that they don't want a nuclear weapon.
What about this secret plant that was announced, an Nuntez plant that it hadn't declared 2 years ago? I mean,
there was no secret plant. As Mark rightly said, Iran has the obligation to declare its nuclear facilities 90 days before the nuclear material is introduced to it. So that was not this. And we have to look at Iran's safeguard agreements with the IAEA.
Mark, you're smiling there. I mean, just to be, sorry, but Shirin, I mean, actually, did not Iran follow the letter of what its obligation there?
It followed the letter of what its obligations were 10 years earlier to that, but the rules changed after Iraq was found to have gotten away with violating it. Iran accepted the new rules to provide reports as soon as it makes a decision to build a new plant, and then unilaterally decided to change back to old rules. The IAEA said, no, you can't do that. You can't unilaterally change it. But that's what they decided, a double standard.
Well, I mean, Richard Dalton, I mean, do you think that Iran, I mean, obviously it's a nation that hasn't attacked any of its neighbors, certainly in recent history, certainly 300 years. Do you think that it is actually pursuing an aggressive foreign policy at the moment?
In certain parts of the Middle East, yes, it is. I believe that attempts to reject peaceful solutions to the disputes between Israel and the Palestinians represents an aggressive policy. I also believe that the arming of Hezbollah in Lebanon and the use of those weapons is also an aggressive policy. But we need to look at the overall context for that policy, and there's no doubt that Iran is open about not only pursuing such policies for ideological reasons, but also to establish forward defense against potential attack on its territory by other countries, including Israel. And that's one of the ways in which they believe they can deter such attack, because they have the potential through their proxies in the region of creating a great deal of difficulty for any country that did choose to attack
because,
them.
Sir Richard, I mean, it's fair enough. Britain, of course, never describes its own nuclear weapons as weapons of mass destruction. They're always called a nuclear deterrent. I mean, isn't it understandable that other nations, when they feel under threat, might also want that kind of deterrent?
It may be understandable, but they have to act in accordance with the undertakings they have given. There is no carte blanche in international law for any country that wishes to develop any weapon that it wishes. There are institutions and there are treaties which countries adhere to, and quite rightly allow them their own adherence to that to be verified internationally, which limits countries' options. And Iran has voluntarily entered into such limitations through its membership of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Therefore, it's entirely right for other countries to scrutinize what Iran does. And if there are grounds for suspecting that they have covert programs and that all is not what it seems, then the international community is perfectly right to put its weight behind the Secretary General of the International Atomic Energy Agency in seeking answers.
Okay, just finally on the IAEA, because we want to move on, IAEA, we just want to move on after, but do you think they are totally impartial in that sense? Because Iran claims otherwise. And of course, remember before the war in Iraq, UNSCOM, the UN inspectors there, Russia and others accused them of actually, and indeed, intelligence information, going to the Americans, American agencies. I mean, do you actually have full confidence, Mr. Amano, the director you talked about, everyone else, are actually just playing on an even field in this regard?
Yes, I do. It's possible to ask searching questions of how individual pieces of information have been used, but
and their provenance,
that they are the front end of the spear that the international community has to ensure that countries all the way around the world are adhering to their obligations under the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and the governing board of the International Atomic Agency exists in order to keep those investigations impartial, and the governing board will express its reservations to Director General Amano if it has serious concerns on this occasion.
Okay, thank you, Sir Richard. Stay with us, because, I mean, but, if you think about the perceived threat from Iran, and in the media it is presented in that all the time that there is this threat. I mean, Iran's military expenditure, by the way, is about 1.2% of the United States, $8 billion a year, compared to $650 billion. I mean, how can Iran threaten the West in the way that it's perceived? I mean, that's nonsense, isn't it?
I think the question might be, how does Iran threaten its neighbors in the Gulf? They feel a very strong threat. And yes, Iran's conventional weapons budget is much lower than superpowers.
Same as Norway, for example.
But in a way, that's why they're pursuing a nuclear weapons option, partly to compensate for what is a severe
difficulties. Isn't the real threat, though, not to actually these people, but isn't it a threat to Israel's regional monopoly over nuclear weapons, which means that there is no deterrent available for Israel's aggression in the region?
I think that's probably one aspect of it, but that's not what the Gulf countries are raising concerns about. They're very concerned about the threat that they are feeling from Iran, about Iran's hegemonic desire to rule the Persian Gulf. And that's all. I mean, there are many aspects to this problem. Israel is not the only problem point here.
Shirin?
Well, that's interesting because this issue of Iranophobia in the region actually has not been that bad for the arms sales of many Western countries. For example, the UK is the second arm exporter, to Saudi Arabia. Only last week we saw that the UK Prime Minister was there without any UK reporters and sold many or signed many contracts. We don't know because not that many reporters were there. Actually, British MPs have said that, have questioned the Prime Minister about this issue. So the more you magnify this imaginary threat of Iran in the region, a better market you have to sell arms, because all these countries of the Persian Gulf who sell all their oil, I mean, they become so rich, so what are they going to do? They need to spend that money. And so this, issue of Iranophobia in the region is quite useful. But going back to Iran's violation of international law, supposedly, now that we have the pleasure of having Sir Richard Dalton on the show, I want to refer to one article, fantastic article that he wrote during summer and was published in The Guardian. And the title of that article, with 5 other former ambassadors to Iran, was that Iran is not in the breach of international law. Of course, he mentioned that, I mean, he's here, I should not speak for him, but he said that international community has a legitimate concern, which I think is true, everybody has, but also the IAEA has obligations vis-a-vis Iran as well. IAEA is not its only responsibility is not just to threaten or to inspect, but also to help within the peaceful nuclear energy field, to cooperate with Iran, but we don't see any of that. And Iran, after they voluntarily agreed to this additional protocol, they were immediately sanctioned. Yeah. So of course they are going to leave that.
I want to come in, Richard Dalton. I mean, isn't it understandable? I mean, Britain basically was involved in toppling Iranian governments in 1908, 1941, the Mossadegh, of course, in 1953 with the CIA. I mean, the West is meddling there. Isn't it about oil? Isn't all this really about energy? Iran being probably the second largest, depending on the figures, with Iraq, obviously, which is now largely under Iranian influence. I mean, isn't this what it's all about?
Can we just park that? Because there's so much that's been said that needs a reply first. First of all, I don't agree that Iran wishes to rule in the Persian Gulf, but it's completely wrong to say that the Gulf countries have no reason to perceive a threat from Iran. The fact is, people would be less concerned about potential weapons development in Iran if Iran hadn't at the same time been developing short, medium, and eventually long-range missiles which are capable of carrying nuclear warheads. And the disquiet felt about Iranian military developments and the potential threat they posed is legitimate in many circles in the Persian Gulf. Sometimes it's exaggerated.
So, Richard, please, I've got about 30 seconds, please. I do apologize, but our time is coming to an end, so carry on.
The next point is that the Iranian situation is now such that we are not maximizing our opportunities of obtaining diplomatic leverage. This is really the issue which is raised by the latest round of negotiations. Yes, I believe President Obama and others are sincere about wanting a diplomatic outcome, but I don't believe that they are judging their tactics correctly in order to achieve that.
Okay, so Richard, I do apologize, I have to stop you there. I think everyone on this panel would agree that Western diplomatic policy to Iran since the revolution has not been particularly successful. But we're coming to a short break now, thanks to all our guests coming up in the second half. A man who left London to join Al-Shabaab is killed during a drone attack in Somalia. So are British Somalis attracted by what the government has called jihadi tourism? Well, that's in a few minutes. Stay with us.